Hi, my name is Aya, you're watching Aya Reads, and I'm here to talk about my top 30 favorite books of all time. So basically, the reason for making this video is that today, when I'm uploading it, it's August 22nd, and it's my 30th birthday. And I don't know why, I never really thought that I was gonna be this person. I was like, oh my god, your 30th birthday is gonna suck and you're getting old. I never thought that way. But I don't know, for some reason, I know maybe it's because I'm going through some stuff that are not that fun for me. I'm just not looking forward to this birthday and definitely not looking forward to turning 30. So I figured, you know, to make myself feel better, let's just talk about what I love, which is books. And let's just talk about my top 30 books I have ever read. So most of them are actually series, and when I talk about the series, I'm gonna mostly talk about the series as a whole. So actually there's more than 30 here, but I don't care. I'm still gonna talk about them. And there were actually 15 honorable mentions. And the reason they were honorable mentions is because I have never reread them, so I don't know for sure if they are favorites. And I was debating on putting them in this video, but this video is already gonna be ginormous with 30 books to talk about. So I figured I'm gonna make another video talking about these specific books because I wanna make a plan of actually rereading them. So this video is just gonna be talking about my top 30 books of all time. And these are gonna be in the order of when I read them, of when I read the first book. So, but I love all of them equally. Some of them have been with me throughout the most difficult years of my life. Some of them I've been reading for decades now. So yeah, the first one I'm going to talk about is controversial. Before I even start, it's actually going to be Harry Potter. First of all, before I even tell you, talk about this series, I don't support J.K. Rowling in any way, shape, or form, okay? I don't agree with her opinions. I don't support her whatsoever, but I cannot deny that Harry Potter is one of my favorite series of all time. It has gotten me through some of the worst and darkest days of my life, so it wouldn't feel right to leave that out. Having said that, yeah, it does suck that she's a terrible person, and yeah, but having said that, maybe it's because I've been reading it so long. When I reread them now, I can separate the art from the artist. I don't know if I can do that with her recent books, so that's why I really don't want to support her financially anymore. But like the Harry Potter books I do own, I bought before like all the things came out about her. But again, having said that, this is a positive video. Harry Potter, one of my favorite series of all time. I really do love it, and I've been rereading it for decades now, and every time I reread it, I still love it. Next is the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead. So this is kind of cheesy. The cover definitely is cheesy, but I love it. I love it so much. I actually recently reread it. I reread it last year, actually, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I still love it just as much as I did the first time I read it. Vampire Academy, you follow basically there's three types of vampires in this book. You have the Moroi, who are... Okay, you actually have the Strigoi, who are like your typical vampires that we know in pop culture. Vicious, just out for blood, have no soul, that kind of shit. The Moroi are basically like also they are vampires, but they are not immortal, and they do need blood to survive. But they do have issues with sunlight, but they are like the good vampires. And then you have the Dampier, who are a mix between basically a Moroi and a human, and they are basically tasked to protect the Moroi from the Strigoi. And we follow a Dampier named Rose and her best friend Lissa, and they've been best friends forever. And Rose, all she wants in life is to become like the guardian for Lissa. And along the way, she falls in love with another Dampier called Dimitri, and it's a forbidden love story because he's her teacher, and they both have to protect Lissa in the future, so they cannot really intermingle. This is such a good series. I do think it stands the test of time. I really enjoy it, and it's definitely one of my favorite series of all time. The Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I'm actually rereading this series right now, so I have reread this book multiple times, or this series multiple times, and I still love it just as much as I did the first time around. I do have to say, the first two books are the kind of weaker ones in this series, but I don't care, I still love them. And as far as like the overall story arc, I do think, even though, spoiler for another series on this list, I do think I think this is a better series than A Court of Thorns and Roses, actually, because it has a clear beginning, middle, and end. Whereas that one, I think because she started adding books later that she wasn't intending from the beginning, it kind of muddies the story arc a bit. But I don't know, that series is not finished, so it's easier to say it about a finished series. Throne of Glass, I've loved it forever. I started reading this series around the time Hour of Fire came out, so I've been reading it for such a long time. I have been anticipating the next books in the series for such a long time. It has such a special place in my heart. It has some of my favorite characters of all time and some of my favorite love stories of all time. And Throne of Glass, you follow in the first book. I do have to say, the story you read in the first book is vastly different from the story at the end of the book. But anyway, you follow a assassin named Selene in the first book. And in the beginning, actually the beginning scene, she gets taken from these salt mines, which is basically a slave camp for prisoners, by the crown prince of the country and his guard, and the captain of the guard, to basically ask her to compete in these games, and the winner of these games get to be the king's champion. So she says yes, because the alternative sucks. And in the first book, there's like this love triangle between her and the prince and the captain of her guard. But like I said, where you start in the beginning of the first books are definitely very solidly YA, and then while reading this book, it slowly turns into an adult series, and you really grow up with Selena, and it's just such a good book. I really love it. It's such a good series. Definitely 100% in my top 5 favorite series of all time. The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. As much as I say I don't love triangles, this one is a perfect example of what a love triangle should be. This is even more surprising to me that I love it, because I don't really love the Mortal Instruments, whereas this one had my heart from the beginning. I do have to say, the first time I read Clockwork Angel, I was not that big a fan. Well, I mean, I was a big fan. I did really enjoy it more than the Mortal Instrument, but I was like, it's fine. And then the second book just broke my heart. It broke my heart into smithereens. And the third book, even more so. This is such a good series. And I love that it's historical romance, actually one of my favorite genres. And I should have known that after reading this book, because I do really love the whole, I think it's Victorian setting. It's so good. It is so good. I love Will, I love Jem, I love Tessa. I do have to say, I've only reread the first book, but I do remember, like, the second book especially, and the third book, they have a chokehold on me. I've never been able to forget them. So there is a reread coming for me in the future for this series. But yeah, basically this is, like I said, you follow in Victorian times. Tessa is from the US. She goes to London to find her brother. And while doing that, she comes across these shadow hunters called Will and Jem. And therein starts this epic love triangle. And her finding out about this shadow world and finding out about herself and what happened to her brother and stuff like that. Very good trilogy, and you can definitely read this without having read any other Shadowhunters series. The Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. Once again, a series that I'm currently rereading. And once again, very interesting. Like, the first book is definitely the weakest out of them all, because it kind of relies on a gimmick that once you find out about the whole thing, it does make this first book a little bit less good, but the second and third book 100% make up for it. So basically the gimmick is, in the first book you follow her throughout this entire series, but you follow this princess named Leia, and she was supposed to marry this prince, but on her wedding day she flees, and then 2 men go after her. The prince she was supposed to marry, and then an assassin from another kingdom sent to kill her. And in the first book, or in the first half of the first book, these 3 interact with each other, but you don't know who the prince is and you don't know who the assassin is About halfway through, that gets revealed to you, and then in starts this whole like war between three different kingdoms, and Leah, Rafe, and Caden are kind of in the middle of that. Like I said, I did reread The Kiss of Deception, and obviously by the time I reread it, I knew who the prince was and I knew who the assassin was. And this book, I enjoyed a little bit less the second time around because I knew that secret, but I recently reread the second book, and that book was even better than I remember. This is such a good young adult fantasy romance. It doesn't have any spice. I don't think it needs it because I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I love the writing. I love these characters. And even though Leah can be frustrating at times, I do really love her. And it's just such a good trilogy. It's pretty old now. When did it come out? Yeah, it came out in 2014, so yeah, 9 years ago. But I do think it stands the test of time, and I really, really love this trilogy. The Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. So I also obviously read the Shadow and Bone trilogy, but that kind of pales in comparison with the Six of Crows duology. I love this duology so much. I once again recently reread it, and I still love it as much as I did the first time around. This is actually signed, and I really cherish this copy. First of all, Leigh Bardugo is a hilarious person. If I could meet her again, I 100% would. Six of Crows, you follow these 6 criminals in this city called Ketterdam, which is heavily influenced by Amsterdam. Basically, they have to do this heist, and it's such a good duology. I am so sad that this is not longer than a duology because these characters are so well fleshed out. These character relationships are so well fleshed out. It is such a good series. Yeah, there's basically 3 couples in this series. I love all of them. And yeah, it's perfect combination between funny, sad, swoony. This series definitely has it all. And if you've not read this duology, you can definitely read it without having read the Grisha trilogy or the Shadow and Bone trilogy, because I actually read the Six of Crows duology first. So you can definitely do that. It is popular for a reason. A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. And I do have to say, my favorite is definitely A Court of Mist and Fury. I think it's everybody's favorite, but I do think like A Court of Mist and Fury is definitely one of my favorite books of all time. I love it so much. It's such a good book. And as much as I do love the other books, this definitely stands out to me. This arc of these 2 people falling in love is so beautiful and heartbreaking to watch. Both of them deal with such significant trauma, and the way they heal each other and find love is a masterpiece in my opinion. Before reading A Court of Mist and Fury, you do have to read A Court of Thorns and Roses though, otherwise this will not have as big of an impact. In A Court of Thorns and Roses, you follow Feyre, who accidentally kills a fairy or a fae. So a high lord from the Fey realm basically abducts her, and it's basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling the first book, and his lands have a curse on them, and if he falls in love with somebody, or if she can love him, the curse gets broken. So basically he's set out to get Feyre to love him. So A Court of Mist and Fury does have a different love interest, and it's such an epic ride. Especially A Court of Mist and Fury is, yeah, definitely, it might actually be my favorite book of all time. So yeah, highly recommend this series. Sarah J. Maas is without a doubt my favorite author of all time. The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. I do have to say, I am referring to the first 3 books. The 4th book was kind of a letdown in my opinion, but the first 3 books I thoroughly enjoyed. This is such a whimsical story about this girl named Blue who comes from a family of psychics, but she's not one. And ever since she can remember, her family has told her that when she kisses her true love, they will die. So she's basically told herself that she was never going to kiss anyone. She meets the Raven Boys, one of them being Gansey, and he actually is obsessed with this whole mystery of this dead Welsh king. And yeah, like I said, their paths cross, and starts an epic story of them finding this Welsh prince, falling in love, and you also follow the rest of the Raven Boys who also have their own story to tell, and it's such a good series. It is unlike anything I've ever read. I do think Maggie Stiefvater is very creative in her stories. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is my first Taylor Jenkins read. I'm pretty sure it's a lot of people's first Taylor Jenkins read. We follow this elusive Hollywood starlet called Evelyn Hugo, who has had 7 husbands, and for the first time in years, she's granted this interview where she basically tells her story, and we basically, this book, we read about her story of her becoming famous, of falling in love, of her 7 husbands, and this just had my heart from the very beginning. I do have to say I've never reread it, but I do remember loving it so much, and I did definitely recommend it to people in my real life as well. There were times where I could not stop thinking about this book, and I do really want to reread it in the future, but from what I remember, I do really love it, and it is definitely one of my favorite books I've read in my life. The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. This one I really need to buy. I don't know why I haven't yet. This was my first ever historical romance, and it definitely made me a fan of that genre. And the Duchess Deal, basically you follow this girl who's a seamstress, and she made this god-awful wedding dress, but the duke that was supposed to marry the woman who was supposed to wear this wedding dress never paid her, so she decides to put on this wedding dress and go to this duke and demand payment, and he tells her that he's not gonna get married to this woman, but if she's willing, then he could marry her, which would be very good for her because she'd become a duchess. So she agrees, but this is basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And one thing you need to know about me is I love historical romance, Beauty and the Beast retellings. It's one of my favorite sub genres. So he tells her basically, the only thing you need to do is just give me an heir, and then you'll never have to see me again, and we can go our separate ways. So that is what he's setting out to do, basically just avoiding interacting with her unless it's at night when he has sex with her to get her to become pregnant, and then just leaves her again. She, however, starts developing feelings for him, and she wants more than what he's willing to give. So it just follows their story. It's so good. Tessa Dare is hilarious. And even though this is, what I really loved about this book is it was a perfect combination of very sad things, because she has a bunch of sad things happening that have happened in her past, and him, because he came back from the war very scarred. So that's why he thinks he doesn't deserve love. So what he's going through and has been going through because of what happened to him at war, very sad, but also very humorous. And I really love Tessa Dare, and I really love this book. Looked Apart by Jewel E. Ann. I really need to buy this one. Yeah, if it's my favorite book, I should buy it. Anyway, moving on. This is such a good book. Honestly, if you've read Heartless by Elsie Silver and you love that book, then I beg you to read this one. This is about this lawyer who wants to rent out the office space above his. So he rents it out to this woman, and he's like, okay, fine. But then he starts hearing like all this music and banging noises, and then he realizes that she's a musical therapist, and basically his mission in life is now to evict her, but she doesn't go with his plan. And then things get even worse when his son, who's autistic, really starts to take a liking to her, really starts loving this whole music therapy thing. Yeah, so it's basically a forced proximity situation because he wants her to leave. She's refusing. And it's them interacting, basically a very, very grumpy sunshine story. I really loved it. So yeah, I still remember, even though it has been years since I read it, there are scenes that are still living in my mind rent-free. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Both these books have such a special place in my heart. Laini Taylor just writes so beautifully. I cannot tell you a whole lot about it because one of the fun things about this book and this series is finding out slowly what's happening. Basically, you follow a guy named Laszlo, and he's been obsessed with this city that has been like this mysterious mythical city called Weep. Yeah, and on the other hand, you follow a girl named Sarai, and I cannot really tell you a whole lot about Sarai. It's basically their love story. I do have to say their love story is not really my favorite, but I love Sarai and her whole family and the whole background of this city and trauma and what it does to people. It's such such a good nuanced duology. And I'm very sad, even though I've not read everything Laini Taylor has written, I'm very sad that this is basically the last thing she's ever written. Because like I said, she's a beautiful writer, and I really hope that we hear from her sooner rather than later. Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I love this book. This is actually my first Elizabeth Acevedo and my favorite. This is a book told in verse, so you fly through it and you follow two sisters with the same father, but they don't know about each other. One of them lives in New York, and every summer he goes back to the Dominican Republic and never takes her with him to visit his other daughter, who only sees him when he comes and visits her in the summer. And then they find out about each other when his plane actually crashes on his way to the Dominican Republic. And that's where they find out more about their father, about the secrets he kept, and about each other. And this was so beautiful to read about. Very interesting to read the differences between these girls, one of them growing up in the US and one of them growing up in the Dominican Republic. Such a beautiful story. Elizabeth Acevedo really is a beautiful author. And this is actually based on an actual plane crash that not a lot of people have heard about. So that is also a very interesting piece of history. Yeah, it's the second deadliest aviation crash in US history. And it was actually 2 months and 1 day after September 11th. It's not a well-known crash. So I'm very glad that she wrote about it because it is an important piece of history in my opinion. And yeah, I really love this book. And like I said, if you've not read this one, I would highly recommend it. We're almost halfway through, guys. The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. This is one of my favorite historical romances of all time and one of my favorite books of all time. This one I love so much. And for some reason, this is a very controversial book. Either people love it just as much as I do, or they give it 2 stars. And I honestly don't understand why people give it 2 stars. I 100% love this book. You follow Anthony Bridgerton, who's the oldest Bridgerton, and he's 30 at this point, and he needs to get married. But he doesn't want to marry for love because he saw what that did to his mother, especially when she lost his father. So he has a lot of hang-ups about that. So he decides to marry this woman, like the most beautiful girl of the town. But her sister Kate overhears him saying that he's not gonna love her. So it's her mission in life to make sure that they won't get married, and in doing so they are forced together and they actually start falling in love. This is so good. It's so funny. The banter is so amazing. And I have not reread this one yet, but I know for sure it's still one of my favorites. And when I got reminded of that is when I actually read the second epilogues back to back, and Kate and Anthony's epilogue was the best. This is my favorite Bridgerton, one of my favorite historical romances of all time. Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This is such a great story about morally gray characters. We follow Victor and Eli. And you actually see the present and you see the past in this story. And in the past, they were best friends. Both of them were brilliant, and they figured out a way to become extraordinary. And they found out that the way to become extraordinary, so get extraordinary abilities, is by having a near-death experience. And now 10 years later, Victor just got released from jail, and he's on his way as his mission in life to find Eli and kill him. And in the meantime, Eli is killing a bunch of these, like it's his mission in life to kill these extraordinaries. This is such a good book. It is so good. I love this book where pretty much every character is morally gray. I love this found family in here. I love how creative this whole power system is. It is such a good book. I do have to say, so this has become a series, but I do think, even though I do love the second book, I do think that Vicious 100% stands on its own, and it was actually a standalone for a long time. The Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa, the first one being Rhapsodic. This, if you love A Court of Mist and Fury, I think you'll really love this one too. Basically, you follow Callie, and when she was younger, she made I think over 300 bargains with this man called the Bargainer. And now 7 years later, he's come to collect, and things go from there. It involves fated mates, it involves the Fae. It is so good. What I really love about this book too is that it's actually an urban fantasy at the beginning, and then it becomes like a high fantasy. So there's 2 different worlds, but the world that most resembles our world also has people with powers, with magic. So that was really good. Callie's actually a siren, so that is also like a fun thing in here because her siren's basically pretty horny, and Desmond in this book kind of sort of takes advantage of that. I really loved it. It's a very good trilogy. Yeah, and it's very, I'm pretty sure, no, yeah, I think out of all of the ones I'm mentioning now, yeah, out of all the fantasy-esque books, this is the first like actual steamy adult fantasy romance. So if you're into that, definitely check this one out. The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. Actually, this month I actually reread The Bridge Kingdom and it definitely holds up. The Bridge Kingdom is the story of this girl named Lara, and basically her and her sisters have been trained to marry the king of the Bridge Kingdom to ultimately become a spy for her father. So she's a princess and her father wants to invade the Bridge Kingdom because the Bridge Kingdom is a very important kingdom because of their, can you guess, their bridge. That bridge is the safest way to do trade in this world, and that makes this bridge very important and very highly sought after. She knows that she's the best one to complete this task, so she actually kills all of her sisters, and she gets married to Aaron, the king of Ithacana, the Bridge Kingdom, and they actually start falling in love. And she finds out that there's been lies told about this place and about its king, and it's a very good, very, very good fantasy romance. The stack is going bigger. I'm putting all my hardbacks here. Okay, a giant series that I cannot stop thinking about is The Immortals After Dark by Cressley Cole. What even can I say about this series? Okay, very short and sweet. Basically, we follow all these different immortals falling in love. Basically, there is this, what's it called? A session where like every 500 years where basically like all these different species get mated, but also since all these immortals cannot die, every 500 years this accession kind of cools them, but it also creates all these different pairings, and we basically follow, in every book we follow a different pair mating with each other, and most of the time it's basically mortal enemies falling in love, and it's so good. I cannot tell you my favorite because I basically read them back to back to back to back, so it's very hard for me to differentiate between the books. I am planning on doing a giant reread soon and actually ranking like my favorite books, my favorite couples, my favorite everything. But yeah, I really, really love this series. I do have to say, like, the first two I wasn't really a big fan of. I mean, I gave them 4 stars, I'm pretty sure, but like starting from the third book, I could not look away from this series, and I have been loving reading them. Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is my only nonfiction in here, but I really love this. I actually listened to it on audiobook for the first time, but I bought it because I love it so much. This is such a good book. Trevor Noah really knows how to tell a story because he knows how to juxtapose horrifying events with humor. Obviously, he's a comedian, so if anybody could do it, he can, but it was so good. A piece of history that at least I didn't know a whole lot about, like the whole apartheid thing. The fact that he's literally born a crime, like the fact that his parents had him was a crime. The way he talked about his mom, how strong she was, but also how she had to sacrifice a lot. So good. And then just like these random stories, these funny stories that had me cracking up while listening to it. If you've not read this book, I would highly, highly recommend it. Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. This I love so much. This is the first book in her Brutal Birthright series. It is basically a mafia romance series. And the first book we follow Callum and Ada, and they despise each other. They are from 2 rivaling mafia families. Ada's from the Italian mafia and Callum is from the Irish mafia. And Ada and her brothers, they crash a party that the Griffins, so the Irish mafia, is giving, and she accidentally burns his study, and he gets revenge, and basically their fathers, trying to prevent a all-out war, they make them marry each other. They force them to get married, so it's basically hate to love, where actually she tries to kill him on their wedding day. And this is a fiery story of, basically hate to love. So, so good. It's definitely one of my favorite Sophie Larks, but also my favorite in this series. I really love it. The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Ugh, what can I say about this? I think everybody and their mother loves this book for good reason. You follow this is basically a whimsical fantasy where you follow this guy named Linus, and he has basically this boring office job, and he goes to these magical orphanages. And magical orphanage is basically an orphanage with magical children to see if they're like everything is still up to the regulations, stuff like that. And he is sent to this house that houses the most dangerous magical creature of all, Lucy, aka Lucifer. And when he gets there, he falls in love with all these children, and he falls in love with their headmaster, and it's such an adorable story. These magical children are so adorable. It was so heartwarming, and just like it just like I just felt like the Grinch. Like my heart went from like teeny tiny to like giant when reading this book. It was so beautiful. Yeah, it definitely is definitely 100% worth the hype. It Happened One Autumn by Lisa Kleypas. I really need to buy this book. This is the second book in the Hathaway series by her, and definitely 100% one of my favorites. Basically, you follow this very uptight Earl, and you follow this free-thinking, free-flowing girl from America, and she's everything he despises. And he thinks she's annoying, and she thinks he's very stuck up, and then they fall in love. Once again, I hate to love. So good. I loved watching these two fall in love, and the way he softened for her and the way she kind of matured for him. It was so good. It was so good. The Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. This is like my two favorite things combined: Gilmore Girls and Charmed. That is what this felt like. Basically, you follow this witch from a very small town, and in the past she fell in love with this guy, this warlock named Rhys from Wales, and he basically broke her heart, left her, and she, while she was brokenhearted and drinking, she and her cousins kind of cursed him. Well, they actually cursed him. And then basically she just like moved on with her life. It's 9 years later, and he's come back to this town, and suddenly everything that could go wrong is going wrong for him. And she realizes that this curse has finally come for him now that he's back in the town where the curse was cast. And it's basically their second chance romance. It was so good. I love Rhys in this book. I loved Vivi. I love their story. And like I said, this really hit the spot for me because it's like a mix of my two favorite shows. Yeah, I love these whole witchy stories set in like a very small town. So good. I know not everybody loves this book, but I definitely did, and it's definitely one of my favorite books of all time. I did read the second book, and I didn't love it nearly as much as this one. Wolfsong by TJ Klune. Ugh, the way this book had a chokehold on me when I read it, I cannot even describe to you. This book broke my heart into a tiny million little pieces, and then slowly put it back together again. Basically, this is a story about a male love story about this guy named Ox. And basically, Ox has a terrible home life. His dad is a fucking sucky person. One day when he's 16, this family moves in next door, the Bennetts. They basically take him in, but especially their youngest son, Joe, who something horrible happened to him, and he hadn't been speaking for a couple years until he meets Ox, and he thinks Ox smells like candy canes and like all the good things. And actually the Bennetts, they are a werewolf family. So what Joe is smelling is his fated mate, but Joe's still 10, Ox is 16, so there's a big age gap, so they become friends first. Yeah, so they become friends, and once Joe turns, I don't know. Yeah, once Joe's a little bit older, feeling starts developing, but then a tragedy hits their town and the Bennett family, and Joe leaves for years, and Ox just left heartbroken. And then finally they come back together. It's so, like I said, it's so heartbreakingly beautiful. It's so good. TJ Klune knows how to write found family and family dynamics. I feel like TJ Klune was the perfect author to write a werewolf story because he knows how to write this whole pack dynamic. Like, I was really immersed in it. I really believed the whole pack dynamic. It was so good. Like, just thinking about it makes me want to cry. I love this book with my whole heart and soul. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing a reread for it. Oh my god, I'm like actually tearing up. I'll be doing a reread for it because I actually bought Ravensong on hardback, never read it, because the ebooks for this series is just very expensive. I don't know why, but I do feel like once I read Ravensong, I'm gonna be tempted to buy the ebooks. Yeah, I'm gonna definitely be reading this next month, rereading this. And yeah, if you please do yourself a favor, especially if you love The House in the Cerulean Sea, I definitely feel like you're gonna love Wolfsong. And this is, for my spicy girlies out there, this is definitely way spicier than The House in the Cerulean Sea. So good. So fucking good. Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. This book's so good. Once again, one of my favorite historical romances of all time. We follow Evie and Graham, and their family is basically a Scottish Highland romance. Their families have been at war with each other for generations, and the king is finally fed up, so he basically arranges for them to get married to put an end to this war between these two rivaling families. So Graham has to marry Evelyn, but everybody thinks Evelyn is touched in the head because something happened and she's never been the same. What people don't know is that that's not the case. She's actually deaf. And she was supposed to marry this guy who was this evil villain of a guy. So she put up this ruse that she was touched in the head so that she didn't have to marry him. But now she doesn't have a choice. She has to marry Graham. And once she first meets him, she's very intrigued by him because his voice is so low that she can actually hear or feel the vibrations. So she's all like, at the very beginning, she's like, yeah, that's fine. I'll just get married to you. But Graham, since he still thinks she's touched in the head, feels like that the king basically just ruined his whole family line because he's not going to force himself on somebody who can't consent to it. But he's also not going to cheat on her because once he makes a vow, he sticks to it. And then, once she gets to his house, she feels it's safe enough that she can confide in him that she is deaf and not touched in the head. And that is just like his best day of his life because that means he can finally have sex with her. This book was so good. I loved both of them. I loved their families. And the only thing that is sucky about this is that she was supposed to write 4 books and she only ended up writing 2. But yeah, I could reread this over and over again and never get bored. It is such a good book in my opinion. Next is a Twisted series, but mostly just these two. Twisted Games and Twisted Hate by Anna Huang. The first and the 4th book I didn't really love, but these two I definitely wholeheartedly loved with my whole heart. Basically, Twisted Games, you follow a princess named Bridget and her bodyguard, them falling in love. It is a forbidden romance, but it's so good. Princess Diaries, and especially Princess Diaries 2, is one of my favorite movies of all time. This 100% reminds me of it. And then Twisted Hate is about Jules and Josh, and Jules is Josh's sister's best friend, and he hates her. He thinks she is just bad news for his sister. He doesn't even want his sister to be friends with her. And then they start working together, and then basically they start just having sex, but basically hate fucking each other. And that turns into love. Both of them are so good. They're hyped for a reason, and I can definitely understand why. I just had such a good time reading these books. Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. First of all, this cover is gorgeous, and the inside is even more beautiful. We follow, it's basically a historical romance, but unlike any historical romance I've ever read, you follow this female pirate captain named Bennett, and she is married. But she's basically been running from her husband for 2 years because of things that happened in the past. And then she gets captured by this pirate hunter named Ashley Cutler. And he basically just wants to see her die at in the gallows. And she kind of wants to seduce him to save her life. And so starts a love triangle. There's more to it than that. This book is so good. This book is so fucking good. After I read it, there were months where I could not stop thinking about it. I love this story. I love Pam Godwin. This is definitely a very dark romance though, so keep that in mind. It does deal a lot with especially sexual assault and rape in here, so definitely check your triggers, but this was a masterpiece in my opinion. Oh my god, I've been talking for ages. Okay, almost done, just 3 left. The Hathaways by Lisa Kleypas. So actually the last 3 I only read this year actually, but I love them so much. I cannot imagine them. I'm not going to be loving them for years and years. The Hathaways, I loved each and every single one of this series. It is such a good series to me. Basically, you follow the Hathaways, who are this quirky family who they inherited a title. They were never supposed to have it. So they are very different from all the other people from the ton. You follow, like, there's 5 siblings, and you follow each love story of the siblings. The first book actually is about Amelia and her brother Leo. He has been going through something traumatic happened to him in the past, and therefore the only thing he wants to do is just drink, gamble, have a good time, not have any responsibility. But since he is a Viscount now, he has responsibility. So she, one night, goes out to find him in London. There she meets Cam Rohan, and their love story starts. And because of that, you kind of see the rest of the love stories unfold, because he really helps them out in a lot of different ways. He falls in love with Amelia and with her whole family, and he really becomes an integrated part of their family. It is so good. I love these books so much. My favorite is definitely Married by Morning, which is the 4th one, which is actually about the brother. And the rest are all sisters. 1 brother, 4 sisters. But honestly, I loved every single one of them. I gave all of them 5 stars. I would highly, highly recommend this series. I loved it even more than the Wallflowers, actually. So good. So good. Top Secret by Serena Bowen and Elle Kennedy. I actually reread this book this year as well. So I read it for the first time this year, and then I reread it sometime in May because I could not stop thinking about it. This is a male-male love story, and we follow Keaton and Luke, and they are frat brothers, and they live on the same floor in their frat house, and they despise each other. They hate each other so much. But Keaton, so Luke is bi, and Keaton always thought he was straight. So his girlfriend suggests having a threesome with another guy, so he obliges. He goes on this kink camp. That is a series. Anyway, this kink app to find another guy to add to, to have a threesome with. And there he starts chatting to somebody, and they start hitting it off. And while talking to this guy, he starts finding out more about his sexuality. And then when the day comes to actually have this threesome, they realize that the person they have been talking to is their frat brother, who they hate. And it's basically their love story. It's so good. It's such a good story. Grump Sunshine to the max. And I loved, Luke had a lot going on in his present. Like, he has a shitty home life, and Keaton is rich and basically very privileged. And, that dynamic was really good. And like I said, I've already reread it, and I loved it just as much as the first time. So I'd highly, highly recommend this book. And then last but most certainly not least is The Bully by Sophie Lark. The reason I can confidently say this is one of my favorite books is because it's a culmination of, let me actually count, 6 plus 2 plus 2. Yeah, it's a culmination of like 10 books. And I felt like she definitely stuck the landing with this book. This is a Dramione love story. Actually, one of the things I love is Dramione. Dramione is a couple that should have happened. And I love reading, well, I haven't read a whole lot, but in the past I have read a bunch of Dramione fan fictions. And this just felt like a Dramione story to me. You follow Dean, who, especially in the first book, he's definitely the villain. Basically a Draco-type character. You follow Kat, who in the book before it, she did something, and Dean found out about it. And now in this book, he is basically blackmailing. He basically makes her his sex slave for a month. She basically has to do anything he wants. And she's very intrigued by him. She has always been intrigued by him from the very first moment she laid eyes on him. So even though it's technically supposed to be non-consensual, it's really not. It's like, if anything, it is like dubious consent, but not even that. It's basically like consensual non-consent. This was so good to me. It was so fucking good. I keep thinking about them often, and this was such a well-crafted story. I absolutely loved it. It's definitely one of my favorite books I read this year, and definitely one of my favorite books of all time. Oh my god, my camera is almost dying, and I'm almost dying because I talked way too much. Talking about 30 books is such a struggle. Anyway, these are my top 30 books and series of all time. And definitely let me know in the comments below if you agree, if some of these are also your favorite books, or just let me know your opinions on any of these books and series. I am very interested to know. And one thing I would also really like to know is if you hated one of these, because that is an interesting difference, because these are definitely like my favorite books I've ever read. Let me actually tell you. So this is my top 30, and I have read over 600 books logged on Goodreads. So I'm pretty sure it's more than that, because it's more than that actually, because I have read more books than I put on Goodreads, because I only started my Goodreads in 2011. Yeah, I read 622 books. So these are the 30 I love the most. I know a bunch were series, but that is what I mainly read. I mainly read series. I love series. Series are like my favorite things to read. And please don't ask me favorites, like my favorite book of all these series, because for most of them, that is just impossible to me. I would also really love to know like your top 5 favorite books of all time. Please let me know, because I would love to read them and gush about them with you. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.